All right, Dinesh, we'll start at 3 p.m. sharp, huh?
Yeah, no problem.
I'm putting out a reminder post so that they can join.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well and welcome, Dinesh. It's so good to see you, albeit virtually. We have met in person in different places, different events and meetings across India. So, really great. And at the outset, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you
You
for
came
having me.
on board. Yes, you came on board with just an email and really appreciate the participation from Westland Books as well. And that's right here. Well, Zoom's feature has some tricks, but that's my copy of Beyond Biryani. And I hope everyone's had a good bowl of biryani and are ready for this post-lunch session. What do you say, Dinesh?
Yes, of course.
All right. And I must say, I wanted to build a set of analogies that your book has been built so beautifully, like the different layers, flavors, and garnishings of a biryani.
It's
All right.
it's ironical that it's called Beyond Biryani, but biryani
Right.
becomes a talking point in all the discussions.
I can, I can, I can see why. And we will not restrict it to biryani, but I can see why, given Hyderabad biryani will be a talking point, but we will move beyond it. All right? Pun intended. So happy to introduce you. So Dinesh, to all our listeners and viewers, Dinesh is an award-winning journalist and author with 30 years of experience reporting on science, technology, innovation, medicine, and other environmental issues. That's a long time, Dinesh, 30 years, even before science communication and science journalism was a thing in India. So
Actually, it is
that's
40.
amazing. Actually, it's 40. It,
1984, I was in my first full-time job in journalism.
oh, wow. All right. All right. Another decade of experience added in. But so Dinesh has a master's degree in communication and journalism from guess where? Osmania University, Hyderabad, which brings us to his strong connection with the city. We're really looking forward to this discussion, Dinesh. This growth and emergence of Hyderabad as a science and technology hub from the stereotypes that have associated with the city, like biryani and Char Minar and Khubani ka meetha, to vaccine growth stories, Bharat Biotech, IKP, and so many others that we'll touch upon in the book. And most importantly, I would like to maybe towards the end of the discussion get from you is what worked for Hyderabad that it could see this growth, and how could other Indian metropolitan cities hope to emulate that? So how does that sound,
Yeah, I
Dinesh?
think
Sounds like
it's
a
a
plan?
it's a
Yeah.
great
So
lineup, I should say. Yeah.
audience, viewers, we are building this biryani layer by layer. All right. Okay, now we're also very, very thankful to Westland Books, and they are right here. Westland Books, this is their call out, a shout out to them. And we have three complimentary giveaway copies of this book during this session. And all you need to do is keep the chat window active with your questions and suggestions and comments on this book chat and for Dinesh. And my colleague Shweta here we will announce the winners at the end of the session, and then you'll get a book shipped right at your doorstep. All right, so we'll get started with that, Dinesh. Just to tell our viewers if they are new to us, honestly, India Bioscience needs no introduction. But if you're new to us, we are a science facilitation organization operating all across India, and we facilitate change and conversations in the life science ecosystem. We operate across a range of programs, and as you will see, there's always something new happening at our end. We have diverse modes of engagement. Website is our go-to place, but we also have a lot of other digital platforms like webinars, like this one, podcasts, e-compendia, and books. And of course, you may find us at in-person meetings and events across the country. My colleagues here and I comprise the India Bioscience team. A shout out to Arushi, who is my co-host on the webinar today, and Manjula and Shweta, and my colleague Ankita, who is not here right now. Um, all right, so if you like books, if you like science books, India Bioscience has a host of them for you, and look them up. All right, lots of new releases this year itself. Okay, so Saurav has already started keeping the chat window active. Uh, that's great, Saurav. All right, let's just dive straight into it, Dinesh. I'll stop sharing. Just a shout out. We have a few questions. We want to keep the chat window active to take audience questions, and the three giveaways are going to happen during this session. Okay, so Dinesh, let's start right in the beginning. Maybe you tell us. We know that you studied at Osmania University, but maybe you tell us a little bit about what is your connection with Hyderabad beyond this period of education, and what, how have you witnessed this transformation firsthand
Yeah.
growing up?
Yes. I was born and brought up in Hyderabad. So
Okay,
I'm a born Hyderabadi, as they say. But now I have lived in equal number of years outside Hyderabad. And I'll tell you why it is important. Because growing up in the 60s and 70s, one could see the city grow in the sense new things happening. Just as today we say a lot of things are happening. In the 60s and 70s also many developments took place. And of course, as a child, you are only an observer. You don't know the bigger story behind that.
true.
But for example, my brother used to work in NFC, Nuclear Fuel Complex. Another of his classmates used to work in ECIL, Electronics Corporation of India Limited. Of course, we knew because EC TV used to sell as a brand, they were also in the consumer market. Like one of my neighbors was working in DMRL with Kalam, which I came to know much later that he was a colleague of Kalam as a technician. He was there, and somebody else was
Okay,
working in ICRISAT. But then I realized that these are all, once you start working or not, I realized these are all the new institutions which are coming up in the 60s and 70s, and they were providing employment. So I grew up in that environment. And as a student in Nizam College, I happened to visit for the first time a research lab, and that happened to be CCMB, which was
hmm,
still operating as a unit in RRL.
I
Of course,
see. I
RRL,
see.
we were very familiar. It was next to Osmania University. I mean, adjoining the campus of Osmania University, but we never happened to visit. But through a friend's connection, a group of us visited CCMB, which was housed in RRL and as a unit of RRL. So that was in the late 70s, I would say, 79 or 80, it must be. So, but those were kinds of familiarity of what's happening in the city. But as I said, one doesn't know the bigger story behind that. In '84, I got trained as a journalist, as a science and communication expert, journalism and communication expert, and joined PTI. I don't know how many viewers of today would know. PTI is the Press Trust of India.
Mhm.
It's a national wire agency. And it so happened that at that time they were running something called PTI Science Service. Apart from delivering the regular news, which is politics, business, and everything else, they had a stream called PTI Science Service, which was headed by Dr. Jayaraman, K.S. Jayaraman, and who has been a long time correspondent for Nature for decades. So he was heading PTI Science Service. And this was a fortnightly service which would go to all the newspapers in addition to the daily wire service. And so I joined that. When I joined PTI, I did not become a political correspondent or crime reporter straight away. Of course, you are trained to do everything in a news agency. I mean, I've covered assembly, I've covered crime, I've covered everything. But then I was placed in this particular unit called PTI Science Service. So the goal of that was to look at what's happening in different labs. I mean, that was exactly what we were doing. So that put me straight in touch with several laboratories, not only in Hyderabad, and then I also happened to work in PTI in Bangalore. So that also gave me exposure to science and technology. And let me tell you, I mean, it may sound a bit archaic today, but we had to really struggle to get information. In the sense, journals were not online, obviously. Internet was not heard of in the 80s. I'm talking of the period before 1990. So we had to go to the libraries. I used to go to the National Medical Library in Delhi when I was in Delhi, or go to CSIR library, or to libraries or different research institutes to look at the journals and see what articles could, make a good science story. And then we would contact those scientists. And if it happened to be in that city, for example, if I was in Hyderabad or in Bangalore, I would visit. There was no other way to contact a scientist or email. So we had to make physical visits. I remember giving cold calls to scientists in Indian Institute of Science while I was in Bangalore, door to door, from department to department. I would go every day and meet somebody in one department or the other and ask them, what are you doing? And they'll tell you, if they had time, they would tell you what are the things which are going on. So that's how we used to collect information. And of course, there were conferences, Indian Science Congress, and all that was there. But certainly, it was a different era, not the golden age of science communication and journalism, but it was certainly different from what it is today. So that way I could get the first-hand information from scientists. I mean, I could see how a wind tunnel works, and it was shown by the scientists, Professor Mukunda and others in the aerospace department. I could see the animal experiments being done. I don't know how many science correspondents today can claim that they've actually gone in in a lab and seen how the rats are in a pattern. They are given stimulation and they do certain jobs. So that was the first experience I saw in LIMHANS in Bangalore. So those were the kind of experiences that built. I covered the space launches from Sriharikota. So a wide variety of experience. So what I'm trying to say is that we have to physically see the processes, meet scientists, and then write about it. So it was a different way of doing. I'm not saying that what we do today is wrong or anything.
Absolutely.
It's just a different way of doing, and that brought more intimacy and familiarity with the scientists and research institute. Many times I've written about labs which I have never visited because I get the embargoed paper, I talk to the scientists, get the codes, and write my story. So I never happened to visit. I mean, because I've continued writing till a few years ago as an active science journalist. So I can tell you that many stories I have written without seeing the scientist or without visiting. So that
I can understand.
So
now, just the way you described it, it seemed very science seemed very open when you started. Like labs were open to journalists, and there was a lot of trust. There was a lot of access. Maybe I was just today making a gate pass at one of our institutes is a half-an-hour job.
Absolutely.
Just to get in. Anyway, all right. So Dinesh, so that's how it all started. You seem to have been one of the very early science journalists in India.
So
and I was
recently, I'll add, it may be relevant to your audiences.
Sure.
I interviewed Dr. Ramachandran, the first secretary of DBT, at a conference on sidelines at Madurai Kamraj University. So then he told me the promise of biotechnology, what all it could do: tissue culture, vaccines, foods technology, and he was talking of all these as possible applications. And we have seen those applications come true not far from that point. So you could listen from the top policymakers what their visions were and what they thought science could deliver. Science was always seen as something which is, it could give to the society. It could have multiple applications, and there were other debates also. Like in the 80s, Chernobyl happened, so there was a massive debate about the future of nuclear technology. So there were debates also. I remember Indian Institute of Science organized a debate where they called both the environmentalists and the scientists on a single platform. So there were
Sounds
public
good.
debates on controversial issues also. So science was done in a different way, and it was also the period of when things were being put together. A lot of institutes were coming up. Imagine DBT coming up in the late 80s, and then suddenly we had about a dozen institutes by middle of the 90s. So
Sure. So I still want to come back to our book Beyond Biryani because this is about science and
right,
technology in Hyderabad. So coming to my next question, moving on a little bit from your connection to Hyderabad and a little more that you spoke about is your growth as a science journalist. In the book, you mentioned something called Hyderabadi mosquitoes. And you also talk about how mahua flowers were used to produce fuel during the World War. And also that Hyderabad hosted India's first regional language university. But there's lots of interesting anecdotes, and I'll encourage the viewers of our webinar to read those. They're really interesting. But and Ronald Ross had a connection with Hyderabad and malaria and mosquitoes. Lots of interesting anecdotes. But
yeah,
I want to maybe here we talk a little bit, Dinesh, about how did Hyderabad build a model for a national lab, the CLSIR, which later became CSIR, which we all know
yeah,
as CSIR today. And CSIR has spawned a range of institutes now, from CCMB to IGIB and several others. So, how did Hyderabad build this model for a national interconnected laboratory system? And how did they? That's the first question. And second question is, how did these labs connect with manufacturing plants to translate some of their products and processes? Because this is something, the second part is something that India is still struggling with. So maybe you can start
yeah,
with telling us a little bit about the genesis of CLSIR in
yeah,
Hyderabad.
yes. See, a lot of things happen because of multiple factors, not only science. I mean, CLSIR, and if you look at just a couple of sentences about how science was organized in India itself, in the pre 47 era and post 47. There were multiple factors. One was the nationalist science, research scientists starting their own institutes. Our institute, Baba started TIFR, and ISI was started by Mohanlal Nobde. So that's a part of history. And CSIR was, of course, started to support the CSIR at the national level was started to support the war effort, as we know, Second World War, because the British wanted supplies. So for that you needed basic some research, and also there was a shortage of goods, and import lines were disrupted. So we needed to make certain goods within India, and for that you needed processes. So there was a twin reason for having a research lab, and that was pretty much the reason for the Hyderabad state, which was under the Nizam till 1948, to go in for a research lab, and they called it Industrial Lab (IL),
Mhm.
which was at the start of the First World War. That's when the mahua flowers, all that acetone was extracted, and it went into cordite making, and they were all interconnected. The process came from the scientists in Hyderabad were trained at Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, and they came here. John Fowler came to Hyderabad, and he suggested how the lab should be organized. So that part happened. So it was triggered by the war, first war. And CLSIR, the Central Laboratories for Scientific and Industrial Research, which was an indigenous part of Nizam's government, was around the Second World War, again for the same reason for which CSIR at the national level was constituted. So CLSIR in Hyderabad was different from CSIR at the national level. But they worked in parallel. There were people sitting on their boards, and they were guiding what kind of research should be taken up. So that was the historical background. And one of the reasons for starting CLSIR in Hyderabad was that Hyderabad had a lot of natural resources. It had coal, it had sugar cane, it had several other natural resources, and for which they needed industrial processes to make fine, refined products. So that was the reason the need for a laboratory in Hyderabad was felt. So that's why CLSIR was set up in 1944, and till 1948 it existed. Till 1956 it existed as CLSIR, and that was headed by Dr. Zahir initially in the initial years, and that got taken over by CSIR through a long process of negotiation and talking and all that. So it was conceived as a regional lab to help Hyderabad be in a position to use its own raw material resources so that it can make products. So that was the goal of CLSIR, and that's why it was when it was renamed from CLSIR after it was merged with CSIR, it was called Regional Research Lab, and that happened to be the first RRL in India, and that
Oh,
became
I
a
see.
model for other RRLs. So, second part, I'll tell you if you have something to ask, then I'll tell you about the model
The
which RRL adopted.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to interject here with there's a nice photo in the book. Unfortunately, yeah, I think you can
Yeah.
see it now of
Yes.
showing a pilot manufacturing unit,
Yes.
part of CLSIR, and
Yeah.
it says it's in 1954. So a
Yeah.
lot of the pharmaceutical and drug research and fiber research, they would pilot it with these little manufacturing plants
Yes.
and then take it up for production at
Yeah.
scale.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about this
Yes.
connect, this
Yeah.
academia
Exactly.
industry connect?
Yeah. Because if you look at the industrial development, particularly in that region, it was not to the same extent, say, it was in Baroda, in other princely states, or even Mysore. So it was at a lower level. So the idea was that an industry, and there were not many big capitalists, unlike Western
Hmm.
India in
Hmm.
Hyderabad region, who could invest money and get technology. So idea was to demonstrate certain processes and then they could take it up. So how do you demonstrate? Just by telling that this process works on the bench and then you take it up. They were not even ready to do that, and there were no venture capitalists or funding agencies which could fund you to the pilot level. It was a very rudimentary financial system at that time. So
Hmm.
what Dr. Hussain Zahir, who headed RRL, CLSIR, and then RRL later, he adopted an approach where because the whole idea was that industrial research should be promoted and it should have some fruits. It should ultimately be able to lead to industrial development. That was his plane. He says, I don't believe that we should all do fundamental research. That of course people should do, but the goal of my lab is to lead to industrial development. So therefore, he said that let us set up not only develop a process but also have a process demonstrated in within the research campus. To have a pilot plant. So like that, they created several pilot plant and low temperature carbonization was one of them. I think the picture is of LTC. So that was the technology which was ultimately taken up by Singarani Colliery. There were several other lab scale technologies which are demonstrated at the pilot scale. Not only he did that, he also got into, which also I describe, which is again a very unique thing, getting into production by itself. The lab would also produce a few things and sell in the market. For example, this
Precisely.
coking coal site was sold in the market in Hyderabad. So that way, and I remember that handmade paper, they had developed several technologies, and that handmade paper was sold to the people. So what do you do if you have a production plant which is producing certain things? Why not sell it also? So today's
Exactly.
context, it may look absurd that you have a commercial arm also, selling. Of course, there was criticism at that time also, but the whole point was that from innovation or the process to market, you do the complete chain because other links were lacking. So that was
Precisely.
the whole idea that you demonstrate. Then he also had an operations research group whereby scientists would go to different industries. For example, they had a very good, strong group in paints and varnishes, chemicals. So he would send scientists from Hyderabad to visit paint companies in, say, Bombay and elsewhere, and to study what processes they are following, where do they need help, and then develop those processes and try and give those processes. So it was a seamless kind of a thing. And there were industrialists sitting on the boards of RRL. They would say your agenda is not aligned with the industry. For example, there were executives from Tata, there were executives from, I think, Sriram Group also was one of the persons. Dr. Lala Sriram himself was on the board of the Research Advisory Council. So there were connections, and they were not nominal connections. People would really go into why you're doing this, why this process has not been taken up. They would follow it up to the last time. So that was the innovation which I think RRL pioneered, and then it became a
Okay.
model for other RRLs to be set up. Jorhat and others were set up. It's a different thing that RRL ultimately became IICT as we know today, and the context changes, and yeah.
I see. I see. Okay. We will come back a little more to the book, but this is a nice midpoint in the session to talk about Shrishti's question.
Yeah.
She says Hyderabad is in the chat window, Dinesh. She says Hyderabad has seen a happy coexistence of many languages, which is a sensitive spot in other cities. Is there a template the city has adopted for science communication in different languages? So, what are the languages in which science is communicated or spoken of in Hyderabad, other than English and Hindi? Urdu?
I don't know about the science communication part. Of course, there
Mhm.
are major languages which are spoken in Hyderabad are Urdu, Telugu, Marathi, Kannada. Because of
Okay,
the regional composition it had pre-1948. There was
right,
Marathi
right.
speaking area which are part of Hyderabad, there were Kannada speaking. So those elements of multilingualism, and multiculturalism are still there. So those strands are there, but I'm not sure if science communication is happening in those languages
Languages.
or not, which is not something which I have studied. But anecdotally, I know it is not happening. But of course, Telugu and English it happens, but to some extent maybe Urdu, but not to a great extent in other languages, because it's also the medium of education. No, it depends on
Yes,
that. If the schools
yes,
are teaching science in a different language, so but there are some groups which work in communicating science or scientific ideas in local languages. Like I know this nutrition literacy group which works with the people, and see Telugu also is a colloquial. Telugu is spoken in Telangana, and it is different from the Telugu which is spoken in the coastal area. So people do speak uh, Telangana Telugu, and some ideas are being communicated. There are civil society groups working in specific areas, like I mentioned, literacy and nutrition literacy, and a few other areas. But yeah, it's happening,
in
but not to the extent one would like.
and certainly not maybe
Uh,
at the extent
science
of English and
communication part,
Telugu.
yeah. True.
Yes. So Saurav has a question. Dakhni is a language that was spoken in the old city. So, following up, is there anyone speaking science or doing science communication in Dakhni today in Hyderabad?
No,
No,
plain and simple, no.
no, I see.
It
Interesting.
is a
Okay.
widely spoken lingo. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody speaks what we call Hyderabadi, which is again, there is a nuance difference between Dakkani, which was spoken during the Qutub Shahi period, than the Hyderabadi, which is spoken today. But there are a
Yeah.
lot of similarities. But see, it's not doesn't have a script. I mean, it's a mix of Urdu, which basically Hindustani
Yes.
Urdu words of Telugu are there in Hyderabadi. But there's no science communication happening. But as I said,
Hmm.
maybe small efforts here and there, but
Hmm.
no, it's the
Hmm.
language which is widely spoken, which is widely understood, and that is why when people go from North India, they don't feel out of place that you are in South. So that is one
Yes.
difference, one cultural difference which you find when you are in Hyderabad and where you're in other capitals in South India, which has helped in a big way, which I'll talk later, and the
Okay.
development of the city as such. It's a cultural factor, but it had a big role to play.
To play. Okay. So we will come back to the science in the book after we take a question from Anuj in the chat
Yeah.
window, who wants to know from the author himself if there was any other name being discussed for this book before you published it, and what was the thought process behind the title?
No, there were a few titles which we discussed. It's always a process of iteration, and ultimately the publisher says okay because you have to sell the book, and title does half the job, and 1/5 is done. Another part is done by the cover. In this case, they have been welcome. I mean, people have liked both the cover design as well as the
Yes,
title. The
yes,
idea behind the title was that as you said that yeah.
yeah,
Lot of stereotypes are connected with every city, not only Hyderabad. It's every
I
city.
see.
The moment you say Lucknow, you say it's a Nawabi city. The moment you say, Kashmir, you connect with the beautiful valleys and things like that. So every city has a cliche. So Hyderabad cliche of late in the past 20, 30 years has been identified with biryani, and there's also a reason for that, because biryani became a product. It got productionized. After,
Hmm.
it was never a product. It was always there as a cuisine people cooked at home. It was there in restaurant, but it became a product. So that gave it a new identity, because the product could be sold everywhere. It had a brand, it had several brands, it had chains. So that gave it a name recall that Hyderabad has something to do with biryani. And as somebody I think mentioned that there are other types of biryanis also there. But of course, so that,
Yeah, I mean, we know Lucknowi
yeah,
biryani
Lucknowi,
and
Muradabadi, and so many
oh,
others.
so
Yeah.
many. All right. Okay.
So, but
Okay.
Hyderabad became synonymous with that. So the idea was that
Yes.
how do you break this myth that Hyderabad is only biryani? Because once you go there, you find that it's a different city altogether. If you're going to Hyderabad after a gap of say 5 years or 10 years, or even for the first time, you find that all your stereotypes are broken. So earlier people used
Exactly.
to talk about Hyderabad for pearls, for different
Hmm.
kinds of things, Golconda, Char Minar, as you said. And but of late, in the past 25, 30 years, it became identified with biryani. So we wanted to break that myth that there is more to Hyderabad than biryani. And of course, at the same time, you're connecting the city with that
Yes.
product.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the book is trying to say something
More
beyond
than that.
biryani. And there were other titles like, people said Bhagmati to blockchain, Cyberabad, all those, fancy things, but they were never they couldn't get the sense of what the book is about.
Hmm. Perfect. And now coming to the fact that yes, Hyderabad has moved way beyond biryani. More recently, Hyderabad was found to be the center of max vaccine manufacturing
Yeah.
during the COVID-19 pandemic. How did this happen? And what is the infrastructure that was built for COVID-19 vaccines? How is this being leveraged for other vaccines? Can you tell us a little bit of Hyderabad's vaccine story?
Yeah, Hyderabad vaccine story is also connected with the Hyderabad pharma story. You have to look at that as a larger backdrop. When vaccine did not happen all of a sudden in a vacuum, because there was an ecosystem already existing in the start of the 90s, where Hyderabad was emerging as a pharmaceutical manufacturing hub, where they manufacture both the bulk drugs and formulations. And as the patent laws changed, people got into different things. And Hyderabad, in a way, is responsible for changing the course of HIV epidemic globally by providing all the cheap generics. And that's a science story, because all the copies and the new processes have been developed in the labs and transferred to these companies, and multiple companies are making HIV ART
Hmm.
drugs, and that kind of changed the course of the epidemic by supplying those drugs to Africa in a cheap way. So that's a pure science story, I would say, one of the most significant ways in which scientific labs have again connected with the industry and made a difference on the ground. And if you go a couple of decades before that, why did that happen? So we had the IDPL in Hyderabad, Industrial uh, Indian Drugs and Pharmaceuticals Limited, IDPL. It's a public sector unit. So that kind of seeded the pharma industry in Hyderabad. See,
Hmm.
purely looking from the profit and loss point of view, PSU may have been a failure, but its contribution to the development of the pharma industry is humongous. And if you look at the top 10 manufacturers of pharmaceuticals in Hyderabad, all of them have some or the other link with the IDPL. Dr. Reddy himself worked in IDPL. There are several others who came out of, because it had a strong R&D group,
Hmm.
IDPL
Hmm.
Hyderabad, where they developed new processes. It was
Hmm.
a Russian collaboration, but the R&D group worked in a very strong way, and people who came out, Dr. Reddy was there, and several others, and they founded this core of the private companies, and that's how it became a pharma hub. And when all that happened, so that there was an ecosystem for manufacturing high-end products existed, because you also need processes. I mean, the production processes. You just don't need a process to a formula or a new process. Also, you need to develop your own manufacturing processes. So all those skills came to Hyderabad, and that's
Hmm.
when new development started happening in the biotechnology. uh, Shanta Biotech came, and that's the story which I describe in detail in the
Yes.
book, and I'll not go into the details, but again, it's a very interesting example where an entrepreneur, and he's not a first time entrepreneur. He had worked in the government, he had worked in the private sector, and then for almost 20 years, and then he started this company. There's no
Mhm.
biotechnology background, but he puts together things. He gets a biotechnologist to work, he gets a lab, he houses it in the incubates it in the Osmania University first, then moves for a year to CCMB, then builds his own lab, company. So that's how the biotechnology based industry started developing. That was the first demonstration that the biotechnology based industry is feasible in India.
Mhm.
So
Oh,
that kind
interesting.
of led to several other development. And parallelly, Bharat Biotech also came. I mean, he was a trained person. He came from US, and so that's how the trigger started. But in both the cases, Bharat Biotech and Shanta Biotech, a massive again, you didn't have finance, you didn't have proper support, all that. So people look for funding. So that's when the Technology Development Board came handy. They gave grants to both these companies. They were the first, I think, first and second allottees of those grants from TDB, which were given to these two companies, and that's how they triggered. And then, of course, several others. The again, like I said, IDPL, the Technology Development Board grants have played a very crucial role in seeding the biotech industry in Hyderabad. All of them,
Mhm.
number of them, the grants ranging from 5 crores to 100 crores, which is
I see. Yes.
unthinkable, for a government entity to do that, which is unthinkable. And how did TDB come into force? What was the idea of the Technology Development Board? See, in the 80s, there was the thought that, let us impose a cess on imported technology. So some 2% or some money was being collected on every import of technology. So that money got accumulated to a certain corpus in the mid 90s. And the finance ministry thought, again, the idea didn't come from a science ministry. The idea came from the finance ministry. So we have collected this much of R&D. Let us utilize in some way. And that's how they got the Ministry of Science and Technology to set up this board to fund indigenous technology. It is not a loan or a soft loan or a equity based thing, and that's again first
Mhm.
time which happened in the government. So that's how so that played a big role. So I think that emphasizes the fact that the state had a big role at various points in promoting private industry. See, I mean,
Including the vaccine
yeah,
manufacturers and
vaccine
companies
manufacturing in a big way.
in a
So
big way.
that
Yes.
happened. So all that infrastructure came in handy when this crisis broke out, and people could use that. Even for that, there was a handholding for DBT and all that. We know that they were supported. So that's the role of the state has always been there. Sometimes what
Mhm.
happens, the private sector tries to downplay. I mean,
Mhm.
I've had interviewed people who say you have grown despite the government. No, it is not that you have grown because of the government. Government had a role to play at critical points.
That's very
Suppose
true.
just imagine if Bharat Biotech had not got that 5 crore at seed money at that point, or even Shanta had not got 10 crores or whatever money they got, and it couldn't have gone ahead. I'm sure they would have got taken a few more years. And the state also plays a role in through procurement of vaccines. So not only
Yes.
it is
Yes.
helping in the processes, it helping in the setting up the policy system for that, and is also making available a market. So let us recognize that. I think that's important.
That's a good point. Sustained state funding. This
Yes.
is an example of that. And you didn't put that initial 5 crores knowing COVID-19 is going to happen.
Yeah.
But when it happened, the
Yeah.
existing infrastructure could be leveraged. And
And
so
not just
sometimes you
two
Hmm,
companies, several of them were set up.
correct. That's a great. So I think Dinesh, this is an idea for another book. That the success stories of
Yeah.
government supported science in India. It'll help us probably help other like community recognize and help the government feel more motivated to possibly give more funds if they need that motivation. All right, Dinesh. So we are heading towards wrapping up. I think we'll wrap up with one question, and then if some audience wants to engage with you, we can and announce our giveaway winners. But so you said there were some inherent factors that helped Hyderabad become what it is, like the fact that People from the north of the country found it comfortable. There was Hindi, Urdu spoken, unlike other South Indian states where language can be a barrier. So, what were the inherent factors and what were the external factors that allowed Hyderabad to have this growth trajectory?
Yeah. So the pre-existing factors, I would say, were quite a few. As I said, there was this legacy of Osmania University. I always draw a parallel between Hyderabad and Bangalore, which people also ask very often. So the only difference between Hyderabad and Bangalore is was Indian Institute of Science was a technical university, whereas Osmania was a a general purpose university. So that made
Right.
a lot of difference in the trajectories which they took later on. Otherwise, all other ingredients remain the same or similar circumstances in which both the ex-princely states grew after 47 Bangalore and 48 Hyderabad. And so there was certain institutes like Osmania University existed, so that had a number of scientific departments and people who were working in rudimentary labs were there. And of course, CLSIR existed. So that was not enough for Hyderabad to take off in 48. But what happened after 48, and in fact, in Hyderabad's case, after 56, that's when Andhra Pradesh came into being. So from 48 to 56, it existed as Hyderabad state. But then
Hmm.
states were reorganized, and so real development in Hyderabad started after 56. And that was a national project. The Nehru government thought that all regions should develop in an even way. There should not be unbalanced, growth in one area and another. So Hyderabad was thought as, it had been isolation. In isolation, it did not benefit as say, no other presidencies were doing well at Madras, Bombay, Bangalore. So Hyderabad was given special focus in that. So when national institutes were organized and reorganized in the 50s and 60s, Hyderabad got a priority. That's how a lot of national labs were deliberately moved to Hyderabad. All the defense labs in the 60s, that's why you have the missile, DMRL, you have Midani, and you have several other labs. They were relocated from north, again for a strategic reason that it's away from the border. So geography also played a role, politics played a role, and this whole thought that Hyderabad should develop played a role in the till certain. So that's how a lot of labs came, a lot of PSUs came. So all those were pre-existing factors. Another
Hmm.
factor which went in favor of Hyderabad, which again other cities may not have that favorable, was availability of land,
Hmm.
which is again a historical factor because the area around Hyderabad were all
Hmm.
crown lands. They belonged to the Nizam and the revenue went straight to the Nizam's private purse. But when that system was ended through a lot of litigation and negotiation and all that, so that all that land bank became available to central government and then eventually to the government of AP. So whichever national institute or central government institute wanted or PSU wanted to set up a center, they preferred Hyderabad, but because land could be obtained easily. In fact, there are several examples like NIN, National
Hmm.
Institute of Nutrition. It was existing as NRL, National Nutritional Research Labs in Kunur. And when they wanted to shift out of Kunur, they first considered Madras. That was the nearest and the same state. But they had a land problem. So they could not get, whereas Hyderabad immediately offered a huge piece of land near Osmania University. So that's how NIN came. There are several other examples, like when Dr. Bhabha came to Hyderabad to look for a place to set up the nuclear fuel complex. He
Hmm.
found there's enough land, so he could also set up ECIL there. So these so land availability of land, in fact, that comes even up to the Genome Valley in Cyberabad. Current examples, contemporary example, Genome Valley could be rapidly rolled out because the availability of land with the government. There was no acquisition involved to that extent. That patch of land very near to the city. So all these were pre-existing factors, I would say, which held Hyderabad. So what changed in the 90s was the process of liberalization. And when we talk about that period, we always talk about Chandrababu Naidu, who had a
Hmm.
vision and kind of plan. So he built on that pre-existing factors and quickly he implement the liberalization process. So he got even more new institutes like ISB. He got Genome Valley, and he got all those new developments, which what we know as Hyderabad today. So it was built on
Okay.
the pre-existing factors, and liberalization helped. And again, another factor which often we don't realize is the role of the Telugu diaspora. They are the largest number of Indians professionals in America even today. So that
Mm-hmm.
helped in a big way. A lot of people came back, a lot of people funded. They were in a big positions in US corporations and
Yeah.
US universities. I mean, name any number of people, Dr. Raj Reddy on, but there's so many of them. Dr. Guntaka helped Shanta Biotech. So all those skills and even capital came from that. So those are the factors that added to the pre-existing advantages of Hyderabad.
That's very interesting. So as we close, I'm going to put you on the spot, Dinesh. I'm going to ask you if you could make a, I won't call it a guesstimate, if you could estimate which would be another Indian city with all these factors, their pre-existing
No, it's difficult to say which other city will have all these factors, so to say. As I said, Bangalore, when you compare with Bangalore, you have the similar trajectory. They had the number of PSUs, Hyderabad had number of PSUs, like that. So there were similar trajectories between Hyderabad and
yeah.
Bangalore. But there can, I mean, it's difficult to say. A lot of people have tried to emulate the Hyderabad case, so to say, but you can't do that. No, you don't have the pre-existing factor, but there are elements by which you can do. For example, even if you look at the policy level, I mean, imagine the case in which Mr. Babu pushed a lot of things. He
Hmm.
wanted Microsoft to come to Hyderabad somehow. He managed that. Again, that is a dramatic story because he said, okay, if I have one big name, other big names will follow. So, I mean, you have to be persistent in terms of policy. You have to be, able to leverage the existing factors. I'm sure other cities can also do. For example, IT, lot of people have tried to emulate, but some have
Hmm.
succeeded. For example, software technology parks started at the same time in 5 cities in India. Only two became the so-called Silicon Valley or whatever you call them, Hyderabad and Bangalore. So that policy alone will not help. Capital alone will not help. It's a mix of several factors. It's a cultural issue. I mean. Somebody we talked
Yes.
about the language issue. So that's one of the biggest assets of Hyderabad. It's so-called north of south and south of north. So we are south, but still people don't feel out of place
Exactly.
in
Exactly.
Hyderabad. So that helps. Why do we need? Why do we talk about globalization when people come, skills move, they are able to freely move from one company to another, live happily, send their schools, kids to good schools. So all those factors come into play. So that's where I think Hyderabad has an advantage over others. But of
So,
course,
so
there
some
are,
are inherent. Some are inherent. There's
yes,
probably
of
no
course,
city can
right.
replicate this
True,
story because no city has the geolocation and the diaspora and the
exactly.
pre-existing infrastructure and Nizam's initial investment
Yeah.
in education. All right, so we are a truly cosmopolitan city, like Saurav says. We are sold on Hyderabad.
Thank you.
Um, I'm going to announce the giveaway winners. I'm typing them in the chat window. The giveaway winners are right here. They are Anuj, Saurav Haldar, and Shrishti Chipde. Congratulations,
Oh,
winners.
great.
What you need to do is send an email to hello@indiabioscience.org, and my colleague Shweta will ship your Beyond Biryani book to you. Send us your email. Yadav, we have your book in the office. Manjula's holding your book in the office. We will ship it to you. And what you have to do is take a picture of yourself reading the book and send it to us. All right? No, I mean, the
And,
latter part is optional.
and also write a review. What you feel
Write a
about
review.
the book, not a formal review, but what I would certainly welcome feedback, good or bad. But certainly,
Yeah,
I would like to feel what people feel about the book. Yeah. No.
that's absolutely correct. So I'll start sharing our slides again, Dinesh. So just to tell them the address, this is it, the email address, hello@indiabioscience.org. So Shrishti, Anuj, and Saurav, your books are waiting for you. We need an email with your addresses. Thank you with a biryani, says Saurav. So Dinesh, like it, love it, hate it, you're not escaping the the usage of biryani.
Yes. Thank
All
you. I
right.
think it was
Uh,
a wonderful being on this program, and must compliment you for not only, I mean, not just for this show, but in general, I think this platform has made a difference to how we look at science communication. I mean, you have other verticals also, but I always look at it
a lot.
vertical for science communication. You do a lot of it, and also in parts, I think science journalism. So I think that needs that widens the community, and you need to have people connecting beyond science also with science. So that's the whole idea. No, make it
Yes.
interdisciplinary. So that's what this platform has done. I think it's a wonderful way
Thank
to.
you. Thank you. I'm sure the team joins me in acknowledging your thanks. And as we wrap up, Dinesh, I was at the Science Journalists Association of India meeting in Pune.
Yeah.
And there people said, so political journalists are stars in their own right. Like you watch them on prime time television and you know them by their names. Literally. They're stars. They'll be recognized on a plane. They'll be recognized in a mall. And then you have sports journalists who are also a genre of their own. And then we came to science, and then you have Bollywood journalists, celebrity journalists, all of that. And then we came to science journalists, and we said, can anybody in India even name a science journalist? And there were very few who could probably do that. And one of the commentators from a national daily said that most journalists hesitate to become science journalists because they feel they don't understand the science, right? To which the argument was, sports journalists don't play cricket; they watch cricket. So science journalists needs to have a broad understanding of the science. They don't need to have been able to do the science. So I mean, really, hats off to you for pioneering this 40 years ago. Do you see the science? Maybe some of our audience members may be thinking of science journalism, and that's why they've joined the meeting. Do you see science journalism in India growing with newer people taking it up intentionally, more interest in it?
Yeah, of course, it is growing in the sense I find a lot more people writing about science. See, this script about newspapers not giving space has been always there, and that will,
Okay,
and that's not generic. That's not to India. It's in several other countries that science doesn't get the kind of play it should get and things like that. And those are issues which the media industry has to grapple with. Why don't we have a good television show on science? So there are issues relating to that, and there
absolutely,
are reasons for
absolutely.
that. Yeah. So because we don't invest in news gathering and how media is owned, and there are several issues connected with that. So,
Hmm,
but
hmm, hmm.
despite all that, I find that there's a new crop of science writers, science journalists, and some of the uh, people who are active on social media, they are doing a good job, I suppose. And there are digital
Yes,
platforms where people are writing in-depth science stories. So those are the new development. Of course, we are not in an ideal situation where a science book will sell 100,000 copies in India, or
certainly,
don't
certainly.
have a star like Carl Sagan or whoever. Like Professor Yashpal did that pioneering television program, where he would answer questions and things like that. But we have had those experiments again in the public broadcasting. Even there
Yes.
today we are lacking. So we need to make an effort at all front. But I'm an optimist. I think things are not that bad. Yes, we need to do a lot more. And there is always hope, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And these, I mean, science journalists like you are writing books, with getting this popular appeal, popular imagination, capturing popular imagination. You're really paving the field forward. So it's great, Dinesh. Lovely chatting with you. And once again, thank you to you, and thanks to Westland Books for their partnership and support. It's very nice of them to come on board. Very nice of you to take this up as an opportunity. Uh, so I think we will close it with that. And Saurabh says he wants a photo with you. And all we can do right now is a screenshot, but that means science journalists are stars in their own right. We will conclude with that.
Yes.
So thank
Okay.
you all.
Thanks a lot.
I
Thank you
appreciate
for
the
having me.
feedback.
It was a great opportunity. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Manjula. Thank you, Arushi.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Shweta. Thanks to Team India Bioscience. And we're back with something new. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dinesh.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
Dinesh. It was
Bye.
lovely hearing you. Thank you. Bye, Krishna. Thank you.